I would hate to see her future jeopardized because of her father's sin.
After the ending of The Testaments, Episode 9, one question lingered heavier than the murder itself. What actually happened to Becka after she was taken under the eyes? Because the show never treated that moment like an arrest. It treated it like a disappearance beginning in real time. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public punishment, no clear sentence was announced to the audience. Just silence, movement in the shadows, and the cold efficiency of a system that does not explain itself when it removes someone. And that silence is the first clue that Becka's fate was never meant to be witnessed directly. In Gilead, visibility is a privilege. And once the eyes take you, you are no longer part of the visible world. You become part of something else. Something was erased. The immediate assumption is that Becka would be punished for what she did. But Gilead does not operate on emotional justice. It operates on utility. Every person inside the system is evaluated not just by their actions, but by what their actions can still produce for the regime. And Becka's case was complicated, because she did not just commit violence. She exposed a fracture inside the illusion of control. That is what made her dangerous. So instead of a public execution, what followed was far more calculated. She was moved into ICE custody, not as a prisoner waiting for a sentence, but as a problem being processed.
She made baseless accusations. I never laid a hand on her.
The interrogation would not have been about truth in the moral sense. It would have been about reconstruction. Every question designed not to understand what she felt, but to map who else could be implicated, what knowledge she had, and how her act could be reframed. In Gilead, confession is not about guilt. It is about containment. And the most disturbing possibility is that Becka was never meant to survive that process as herself. Because once the eyes take someone, there are only 3 outcomes. The first is erasure, not death in a visible sense, but removal so complete that no official record remains of what happened afterward. Nobody returned. No confirmed execution. No martyrdom. Just absence. A clean deletion from the system, so no one can build meaning around the act. The second is repurposing. If the regime sees strategic value, the person is not destroyed. They are rewritten. Their story is forced into a propaganda structure. Their actions are reframed as warnings. Their identity becomes a tool. In that version of fate, Becka would still exist physically, but not narratively. Her voice would no longer belong to her. And the third outcome is the most psychologically devastating. Breakage, a slow dismantling of identity until compliance replaces resistance, not loyalty born from belief, but survival conditioned through repetition. In that state, a person is still alive, still present, but completely separated from the self that committed the original act. And the series deliberately refuses to confirm which path Becka took, because the uncertainty is the point. What matters is not what happened to her body. What matters is what Gilead does best, turning even rebellion into something it can absorb. And that is where the real darkness of her fate settles. Because Agnes is left behind with no full truth, no closure, only fragments. And in Gilead, fragments are more dangerous than answers. They create questions that cannot safely be spoken out loud. Questions that linger, questions that spread, questions that eventually get people watched. So Becka's disappearance becomes something larger than her character arc. It becomes a warning mechanism inside the story. A reminder that in this world, even justice is not allowed to exist in a stable form. It must be rewritten, hidden, or erased. And the final realization is the most unsettling part of all.
You need help, Beck. I'm sorry I had to tell them.
Becka was not taken because she lost control. She was taken because she briefly proved she still had it. And in Gilead, that is never allowed to last. And that is where the story stops feeling like a single character's fate and starts feeling like a system correcting itself. Because once Becka was taken under the eyes in the Testaments, everything that followed was no longer about her survival. It was about what Gilead needed her to become. The silence after her disappearance was not empty. It was intentional. The kind of silence that is engineered, not accidental. The kind that tells everyone who is still watching that speaking too loudly about her would be dangerous. Even mentioning her name becomes a form of risk assessment inside the system. That is how control evolves in Gilead, not through constant punishment, but through the memory of punishment. and Becka becomes part of that memory, not as a person. But as an example, inside the eyes, structure, cases like hers are rarely processed quickly, not because of inefficiency, but because of design. Time is part of the pressure. The longer someone remains unseen, the more their identity begins to dissolve. Without confirmation, without updates, without any external anchor, a person slowly stops existing in conversation, then in thought, and eventually in behavior. That is the real fate of people taken by the eyes. They are not just removed, they are unspoken realities. And while the system may still decide later whether to erase her completely or repurpose her as a warning, the truth is that Becca's most important transformation had already happened the moment she was taken. Because in Gilead, capture is not the end of action, it is the beginning of interpretation. Everything she did, every choice, every motive, every second of that final moment is now being reconstructed behind closed doors by people who were never meant to understand her humanity in the first place. To them, she is not a girl reacting to trauma. She is a variable that disrupts order, a pattern that must be corrected, and that is where the story becomes even darker. Because Agnes is still alive on the outside of all this, still moving through the structured lies of Gilead, still being told fragments of truth that never fully connect, and she will never receive the full version of what happened to Becka. Only controlled pieces. Because in Gilead, truth is not hidden to protect people. It is fragmented to control them. So Becca's fate, in its final form, is not defined by death or survival. It is defined by separation. Separation from her actions, separation from her identity, separation from the narrative that once belonged to her. And that separation creates something more unsettling than closure could ever be. It creates absence that still influences everything around it. Because even without appearing again, Becka continues to shape behavior. She becomes the reason people lower their voices. The reason questions are stopped halfway is obedience feels safer than curiosity. Her disappearance becomes part of the invisible architecture of fear that holds the system together. And that is the final irony the episode leaves behind. Becka tried to break something inside Gilead, but the system did not break with her. It adapted around her. It absorbed her existence the way it absorbs everything else: violence, truth, resistance, even memory, and continued forward without pause. No justice arrived. No revelation followed. No clarity was given. Only continuation. And in the world of Gilead, continuation is always the most dangerous ending of all.
Grove's daughter, Rebecca, is to be married soon. Perhaps we can delay his fate until after she's wed.